I think there has been a shift. I mean, not as a result of my work, I'm sure, but I mean, I see some shift in discussion in energy research over the last few years towards more consideration of people, more consideration of people's role in decision making and how people actually do things. I do feel that it hasn't quite yet made the leap from saying, okay, well, buildings use energy, appliances use energy, to people use energy. I think there's another leap that needs to be made, which is actually people don't use energy, they do other things, and if we can address those other activities, if we can make those other activities more efficient, more sustainable, in terms of the design of the systems that people engage with and the structures that people engage with, I think we'll I think that will have a bigger impact. So I mean, I don't know how much impact my work has had. I think it's difficult coming from a design academia point of view, perhaps, where we don't have a particularly high profile impact in terms of our publishing and so on. But I think we've had enough discussions with people in with policy people and other researchers in the energy field that I think we've given some of them at least something to think about, which they hadn't previously considered, or different perspectives. So I like to think there's some value there, but obviously there's a lot of work still to do. I mean, there are so many issues to address in terms of how might we solve some of these things, or how might we some of these questions of everything around people's actions and their relation to climate change and environmental environmental impact. But I think honestly, I used to believe that, maybe if we can design things that give people a little bit of feedback, we can design them better, people will use less energy, they'll be a bit more efficient in how they do things. But I think honestly we're coming to a point where it won't be long before governments will impose, or will have to impose rather drastic changes in the way people live their lives. We're going to have to do something on some of these at some point, and as is happening in some places already. So I think the role of design research and ethnographic research in that context now may be to help understand, to help explore how people change the way they live in response to changes in what's possible, what's available. If I start, if we started rationing, rationing carbon or rationing energy, how would people respond? How would people change their practices? How would practices evolve? How would day-to-day habits evolve? And this sounds very drastic, but I think it's the sort of thing that a combination of design research, kind of experiential, what we might call kind of experiential futures research, together with design, could actually enable an ethnographic exploration of how people change. How do they change what they do? What is it that enables new habits to be developed, new routines to be developed, new practices to emerge? And are there ways that can be done in a way which actually doesn't lead to so it is not entirely a bad thing, I guess. So that in some way it could be actually quite desirable, or it could make things better from the point of view of people's everyday lives. I mean, I think the Living Lab approach is an interesting one there. So I've worked on a European Living Lab project, and I think there's something there around the idea of experiential, experimental, different ways of living that people can experience. People can try them out. They can actually find out, okay, what would it be like to live somewhere where this is the case or that's the case? And I think there's value, although it's not real life. It's intentionally not a real life situation. I think there is value from an ethnographic point of view in trying to explore how do people's habits change, and how do the way people do things change when they experience changes to their way of life. In this case, in an energy or an environmental context, because I think we can learn from that to see, well, how can we make things better if that sort of stuff actually comes to pass or is required on a larger scale.
We were fortunate on the LEADER project to be working with colleagues from engineering and design who were truly interested in an interdisciplinary exchange around energy consumption, and who engaged with us in theoretical, methodological, analytical discussion around problems and solutions in the energy sector. I think from an engineering point of view, there was a much greater sense as a direct result of engaging with the ethnographic materials and thinking that what happens in one part of the home might actually impact on energy consumption in another part. So one aspect we looked at in a little bit of detail was how the way in which people dry laundry around the home might relate to heating activities, not always in very straightforward ways. And from the design perspective, the sensory ethnography reframed what is often called the problem space. It provided different entry points for the design thinking, perhaps a little bit away from questions of direct behaviour change and more towards intuitively designing with the grain of everyday life. So, for example, allowing people to do what they already do in more energy efficient ways, or looking at moments that already include some form of transition and change, for example, from daytime to nighttime home, and trying to insert energy demand reduction technologies in those contexts. The LEADER project specifically explored digital design solutions around energy demand reduction. And some of the digital design concepts that emerged from the study can be found on our project website, energyandddigitalliving.com. And the website also contains some of the sensory ethnographic concepts and materials we worked with, for example, some of the ethnographic videos. And it gives a more detailed account of how the sensory ethnography and design work came together and informed each other throughout the project. One of the outputs is a set of home life insight cards, which can be downloaded from Figshare for free. And these are very much based on ethnographic insights and themes that emerged through the LEADER study. For example, they contain some cool themes around people as everyday innovators and movement through the home, and also some guiding principles of how we might understand energy consumption around the home and approach some of the problems and solutions. These cards are specifically for other researchers, perhaps because they might raise some questions that might be worth pursuing. They're also for designers, for processes of ideation or testing existing ideas for products and services. And also we hope they are for policymakers, people in government and industry who might find these useful for rethinking some approaches and some thinking around domestic energy consumption. We welcome any feedback on the cards, and we'd be really interested to find out how you use them for research and development.
Let's take, for example, the finding that the concept of family is central to household life. Well, this is a no-brainer, you would think, of course, as people often say, perhaps about qualitative approaches. But we think there's actually really more than meets the eye to the idea that even in the greenest households, even in the households that think of themselves as the most sustainable, that are very conscious in their a range of practices around energy use and consumption of goods and services and so on. Even in those households, the concept of family and the sociality of the household is still central. So one way to think of this is that it provides a kind of, if you were trying to think about policy implications, it provides a point of leverage that could potentially overcome some of the polarities that have existed in the way we debate climate change as a left-right issue, for example. You could think of family as something that everyone can engage with in their own way, and that if you could leverage family as a way to think about environmental and sustainability issues, it might have more potential than we realise, and might have certainly more potential than labelling practices as green, which is not attractive to everyone. So that's one example. The second kind of set of insights is the confidence we got in our arguments from this kind of thickening and triangulation across a number of different studies. You know, when you do a detailed ethnography, you're always, I suppose, wondering how applicable, how widespread your findings are, and you're never, of course, claiming to be representative of a bigger whole. But there's enough commonality across these studies and enough thickening of the information to provide some confidence that these themes are widely held across a sample.